to tonight's training. My name is Kelly Olson. I am your family child care specialist with the Family Friend and Neighbor program. Our training tonight is going to be simplifying the standards, and we are tackling language and literacy today. So this is the first of 4 videos that we will have. Before I get started, I just want to remind everyone, please make sure that you have signed in on the appropriate sign-in post. It should be pinned right to the top of the page. I am joined tonight by our other family child care specialists and of course Liz Santiago. They're hanging out in the background on this event and making sure to answer any questions for me and keep you guys on track. So if you need anything, you can reach out to one of them or of course myself. So without further ado, off we go. All right. So every single one of these videos is going to start with a question for you to think about while we're doing this. So today's question is, let's try that again. Not today's question. The first question is, what are some ways that you can create a literacy-rich environment in your home child care space? So as I'm talking, we hopefully will answer that question for you, and I would like you to think about that and make sure that you comment your thoughts on this video post. You can do it during, you can do it after. I honestly don't care. Just make sure you don't forget, because that's how we track your participation on each of the videos. So when we talk about standards, everybody kind of freaks out, and I think we're all probably in this boat right now with the whole pandemic nonsense, and we've all found out that our children are no longer going to school and they're going to be doing digital. So, we're all in this together, but I'm sure many of you are not necessarily too familiar with the Arizona state standards. One of the reasons is because a lot of people have this idea that those standards are just for school teachers, meaning, they have a classroom, they've got 36 kids, and that's all about them. However, there's actually a different set of standards that applies directly to us in this program. It's called the Arizona Early Learning Standards, and they are basically created for anyone who provides care for children 3 to 5 years of age. So that is most of you. Now, I know some of you have younger children, infants, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and that's perfectly fine. There is actually another set of standards for you guys specifically. However, they are not necessarily anything new to you, because they are basically kind of modeled around the developmental milestones. And most of us are familiar with the milestones. Those are things like, learning to crawl, learning to grasp items, those kinds of things. So even if you have just young children, this still is going to apply to you, because those kids are going to be growing up. And you should also see where the different skills and developmental milestones your kids are at right now are kind of going towards. And of course, I will be linking those as a resource for anyone who is interested at the very end. So when we talk about standards, the first thing to do is kind of talk about the way that it is broken up. And if you were here for the first video in this series, that would have been math, and much of the first portion of this will look very similar. So don't freak out. It's not the same training. I promise you'll learn something new. But in case anyone missed it, I'm going to be doing a very similar intro. All right, got all that out of the way. So when we talk about these standards, there are actually only 8 standards. So there's a social emotional standard that we probably have heard. Approaches to learning, that might be new to you, but it's not as crazy as it sounds. Language and literacy, which of course we're going to be going over today. Math, science, social studies, and then number 7 is kind of 3 in 1, but that's physical development, health and safety, and then of course fine arts. At first glance, I know that seems overwhelming, but I promise it is not. So when we get into one specific standard, in this case language and literacy, it starts off by giving you this nice little demonstration and descriptive intro for lack of a better term here. And they're going to tell you the kinds of basic things that kids are going to learn. I'm not going to really get into this part too much because we're going to cover it more in depth. This is just to help you know how things are going to look if you decide to attack that document. There's the standard overall, which is one of those 8. But then it has these things right here, these strands. And each standard is broken into these strands, which are like your main ideas that need to be covered, your main content. So we've got language, emergent literacy, and emergent writing. And then within those, there are those little bullets underneath, and those are concepts. So those are specific things within language, specific things within literacy, and within writing that you should be teaching the kids. And then they give you this page right here, which it's so much text. And I'm not going to include this much in the upcoming videos, but I want you to see it here so that you know if it's going to be useful for you. So they give you these indicators and examples, and I actually really like these because they give you an underlined one here that says discriminates letters from other shapes and symbols. And I might not know what that means right offhand, but then I look below in the bullet and it kind of gives you some things that you might see children saying and doing that kind of shows you, that indicates to you that they are learning this particular concept. So like down here we've got traces the letter S and say this letter has curves, or reads a book and points to it and say the letter A is falling off the tree. And when we look at an indicator in that kind of like scope, it doesn't seem as intimidating. Because when I say things like names some letters while playing with alphabet stamps, that's something we've probably seen our kids do. Points out the first letter of their name, writes M on a letter that goes to mom. So when we look at these indicators, they can be very helpful. If you feel overwhelmed, I encourage you to look for these. And again, this will be totally attached in the resources, so you will have all of these if you want them. All right, now we are going to talk about language and literacy in depth, but we also are going to address some of the other standards. There are 2 of them that I will focus on every time because they are extremely important. And without those 2 standards, you can't do any of the other standards. For example, the social emotional standard. We know that this is about our children's ability to handle their emotions, to express their emotions, their ability to form bonds with their caregivers and their friends and their family, and also my personal favorite, self-regulation, their ability to get themselves back under control. Again, without that, our kids cannot focus on anything else. It's just not going to happen. When we talk about that social emotional standard, there's 2 strands. So there's the self, and that's their self-awareness, that they feel and recognize their own feelings, and self-regulation. And then there's strand number 2, which is relationships. So that's going to be their connections to other people, mainly you as their caregiver, and then family, friends, those kinds of things. So that social emotional standard is something that is constantly being reinforced, and it just is happening all the time. It's part of what we do as child care providers. Next is, the approaches to learning standard. Okay, and under this, there are 5 different strands. And at first it can seem overwhelming, but again, if you look at what those strands are, it's not, something you're not already doing. So strand 1 is about initiative and curiosity. 2 would be their attentiveness, engagement, and persistence. 3 is confidence, then creativity, and then reason and problem solving. Now this one is something that I personally like to think of as like their skills or personality traits that help them be effective learners, that help them be lifelong good learners. So these are things you should constantly be encouraging anyway. We want our kids to be brave risk takers, to be willing to participate, to not give up as soon as something gets hard, to actually stick it through and figure out and solve problems. That's what this Approaches to Learning standard is all about. It is about how we make kids that are resilient and that are going to be successful in life. All right, and then we get into the math standard, and that's pretty much, what you might expect. But if you need to know more, there was an entire training on it, and we can certainly point you in the right direction for that as well. It covers counting and cardinality, algebraic thinking, measurement data, and geometry. Science is going to cover that inquiry and application. So that's kind of like the process of experimentation and how to make observations and draw conclusions. All that falls into science. Social studies is going to cover, family, community, and historical thinking. And again, these are ones that there will be another training on in the future, so that we don't need to talk about them all at once. And then that big one, physical development, health, and safety. So when we do physical development, that's all about your fine motor and your gross motor. And then, of course, health, which could not possibly be more important than it is right now. How to keep themselves clean and healthy and safe. And then, well, there you go. Strand number 3, safety. So this is one that's pretty important. And I would wager to say something that we're already doing, again, all day long. And lastly, the fine arts standard. Sounds all fancy, but really it's 3 things. Visual arts, meaning anytime you let your kids do arts, crafts, drawing, painting, that falls into that. Strand 2, music and creative movement. I hope you're playing some music. I hope you're dancing and wiggling, because if your kids are anything like mine, they probably really need to burn off some energy. So embrace the music and dance. And then strand 3 is drama, which, we do dramatic play all day long. Have you ever eaten, a plate of plastic food? Well, then you've participated in drama. So it's not something that's as hard as you might initially think. All right, so then that brings us to our last one here, the one we're going to tackle in depth, and that is the language and literacy standard. Now, this covers 3 different strands. Each one of them is going to get their own video. So the first is language, then the second will be emergent literacy, and then lastly, emergent writing. Now, one thing you can do without knowing any of those other things is it has to do with your environment. And one of the most important things you can do to create kids who have a love for literature and books and reading and learning is basically to create a language and literacy rich environment. That means we want your environment to be like always open and overflowing with these kinds of things. So when we start with the basics, books. Hopefully you have some books in your house. If you do not, you should contact the library, because the library is a resource that sadly I think is dying off, but right now more than ever we should be having tons of books in our home. And if you are concerned about going out in public, the great news is you can check those out online and then just drive by and pick them up. So if you feel like you don't have enough books, you don't have anything near what you see in these pictures, contact the library. They won't let you down. All right, now your books might look anywhere near, that first one with the bookshelf there overflowing. You got horses and a spaceship in there, and everything's kind of stacked everywhere. Or maybe you have a beautiful wall display and you've got bookshelves that are mounted, and it doesn't really matter. As long as you've got some books, you are on the right path. One thing I want to encourage you to do is to think about your book setup. Okay, so if you have a whole bunch of books, you might realize or notice that your kids seem to kind of like ignore them. And I think that is because it's too much. It's too overwhelming. You know, I won't lie. I have a bit of a obsessive love for books, particularly children's books, and I have a ridiculously large library. The thing is, my kids will ignore it. I mean, I've got so many cool books, it'd blow your mind. But they kind of just like get used to seeing them all there. And if you think about it, we put them on the bookshelf and they're all like one, two, three right in a row. Kids can't read the spine of a book. So they have nothing to go on as to whether it looks cool or not. If you have a bookshelf and you feel like the kids aren't really like super into it, I'd suggest doing something like this, where you pull out and you highlight some of the books that you've got. That could be based on what the kids are interested in, or based on a theme. If you're doing like a turtle theme or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You could also just go to the kids and tell them each to pick out 3 books. And then you put those in a basket or a box or a bucket. I don't care what you put them in. You can put them in an old sock for all I care. But that there makes those books more enticing. They're now, you know, something that becomes a focus as opposed to kind of just becomes background noise because there's 8 million of them. So something to think about. All right. If you have books, you should be reading every day. I know. Every day. Okay? You really can't underestimate how important and crucial this is to kids. And you know, the thing is, there's no excuse not to sit down and read every day. If you can't read, it's okay, because you can look at the pictures and tell a story. Half the time when I'm reading to my 4-year-old, that's what reading looks like for us. I hold the book, I open it, I turn the pages, and I tell stories. Okay, so it doesn't have to be everybody sits down and you read it word for word. You do as much or as you can get for the kids that you've got in your care. Another thing you can do is to incorporate literacy into your different areas. So you might have a small space, you might have a big space. It doesn't matter. You can still incorporate literacy. You can do things like adding books to your different centers. So if you've got a block center, a really great thing to do would be put a book about, you know, cities or trains or whatever it is. You can use your books to kind of make that area more literacy rich. If you look at this picture here with the different kinds of cars or wagons, whatever we've got there, they're actually like building cards. I have those. I put them in with my blocks, and when my kids need an idea for something to build, they can pull that out, and then bam, they pick a picture and they try to build something. So if it says build a car, okay, they build a car. If it says build an aquarium, then they build an aquarium. It's a great way to kind of incorporate it into the play they're already doing. Alrighty, if you have children in your home and you feel like maybe things don't get put away like you want them to, I suggest labeling everything, like everything. I literally have a trash can that's labeled. In my bathroom, I have a sign that literally said, "Stop. Did you flush the toilet?" And then there was another one on the mirror that said, "Wash your hands," because, you know, kids like to forget those things. So I encourage you to label everything. And the most important thing to remember is that there should be a picture as well as the word. Okay? If you find that your children are having trouble putting things away where they belong, this right here is going to save your sanity. Putting a picture and then a little you know, label, boom. Now they have no excuse for not knowing where something goes. I highly suggest it. All right, and then encourage writing and literacy and language. All that should be happening during dramatic play. So my daughter, I know many of you are familiar with her. She had a vet clinic, and it was something that she was really super into. And one of the things you can do is bring writing into the pretend play area, into the dramatic play area. So here you can see they've got a clipboard and they've got little papers and there's cute little things on them. But honestly, if you just give them a notebook and a clipboard and a pencil, they're going to do writing, and it's going to add another like aspect of realness to it. Environmental print is something that is all around us. If you don't have environmental print in your play area, definitely, you've got to do it. It takes it just to a whole nother level. You can add things like grocery lists and menus. Take your junk mail and take out all those little plastic cards that you get. Take the coupons. All of that adds realism to your dramatic play. You know, if you take a look down at the different boxes of food, add in real boxes and cans of food, obviously clean and empty, but that takes and adds even more literacy to your environment. All right, now at the beginning we talked about that question, how can you add and create that literacy rich environment in your home child care space? So if you haven't done it during the video, now is going to be the time. Make sure you comment on this video and you give your feedback, your thoughts, share them, and that way we know that you participated and you are here. All right, coming up next at 7 o'clock, we're going to get into strand number 1, which is language. And again, don't worry if you get behind. You can continue watching the video at your own pace. I know life happens. I promise we all get it. So don't freak out if you start to fall behind. All these videos will still be on the page for you. Just make sure that when you comment, you're doing it right on the video there.